We gave this presentation several years ago to the Dyess Air Force Base Retired Officers Club. When they heard that part of the story, they said, "You ladies are crazy. There's no way we would do that."
Welcome to Midlife Dialogues, where I talk to people 50 and over who are doing interesting and inspiring things with their lives. Today, I am talking to Sandy Hazelip and Ellie Hamby. Welcome, Sandy and Ellie.
Thank you. We're glad to be here.
I have to say, seriously, you are my heroes. I love what you do, and our viewers will understand that after they hear more about your story. First, let me introduce you both. Sandy Hazelip is a physician, past president of the Texas Geriatric Society, the current medical director for a health and rehabilitation center, and she currently works as a hospice physician. She is also a lecturer and author and has spoken on women's health issues and participated in mission trips around the world. And Ellie Hamby has traveled to 107 countries and all 7 continents. She's director of the Zambia Medical Mission, and she's there in Zambia every July. They provide medical care in very remote areas to approximately 13,000 Zambians over a 2-week period of time, which is amazing. She lived in Zambia for years in the past and still has a home there where she works several times each year to help oversee the work of the Zambia Mission. She's on its board, which includes schools, a hospital, a radio station, and several orphanages. So I want to ask first, just briefly, Ellie, tell me, how did your work in Zambia start?
My husband, my late husband, and I were always interested in mission work, and he was a professor at the Abilene Christian University, and someone came looking for a headmaster in a small school in Zambia. And my husband was in charge of the graduate program that did that. And after talking with them, wow, this might be the place. And so he gave up his full tenured professorship, and we moved to the remote area of Zambia and just fell in love with it. And then we were there, lived there 6 years, where he was the head and I was helping with everything. And then he came back to his university position, and we continued still to do that work. And the medical mission was started in the 90s. We're not medical. I'm kind of bossy and like to run things. So I think that's why it was kind of natural for us, but that's how that all happened.
I see. Okay. Now, is it right that Sandy, when you went on a medical mission to Zambia, that's how the two of you met?
That is correct. Yes. My husband was a CPA. And one evening, we'd had a visiting missionary that was at our church. And when we got home from church, my husband said, "Sandy, we ought to start taking our grandchildren on mission trips in the summertime." Well, I'm a busy doctor. And I looked at him and I said, "What kind of mission trips?" And he said, "Well, honey, I don't know, but I'm sure there is something we could do that would be a benefit to missionaries and would be a great experience to our grandchildren." And shortly after that, he became ill and he died. At that time, my practice was in Eastland, Texas, a very busy practice. Eastland has a very good small hospital. We physicians there were the hospitalists and the ER doctors and the house call doctors and everything. Busy. And my husband had been dead 6 months when our hospital had just started getting weekend emergency room physicians to give us a break. One weekend, I went over to the hospital to see our inpatients and to introduce myself to the young emergency room physician. And I told him how much we appreciated his being there and hoped that he would come very, very often. And he replied, "Well, thank you very much. I cannot be here next weekend because I'm going to a medical missions workshop in Dallas." So I went to that medical missions workshop. It was a hard weekend for me with my husband being gone, and I didn't know anyone there. And I sort of thought, I don't think this is for me. I started walking toward the door, and a rich voice behind me said, "Hello, my name is Kelly Hamby. What is your name?" And I turned around, and his smiling wife was standing there next to him. And I said, "Well, my name is Sandy Hazelip." And they said, "Well, let us tell you about our work in Zambia." And I said, No. Don't waste your time. I said, "If I go on a mission trip, I need someplace very safe because I'm going to be taking grandchildren." Well, in unison, they smiled and said, "Oh, Zambia is very safe. We take our grandchildren there every year."
That's how we actually met. And we were friends. Sandy was going every other year. And then 5 years later, my husband died in a tennis accident. And about a month after that, and Sandy calls me one evening and she says, Ellie, I've got a deal for you. And she said, well, I have been asked to open up a geriatric clinic at the hospital in Abilene, where I live. Would you give me a bedroom a couple nights a week and I'll take you out to eat? And I said, sure. And that was 19 years ago. And that's how we became good friends. You know, we both had two devastating losses. Our husbands did not know each other, but they were very similar personalities, big personalities. They were both very much about empowering women. And they empowered Sandy and I to dream, to do what we wanted to do. So whenever that tragedy happened and that door of our life was closed, there were open windows. You know, we all have tragedies and life goes on, and you need to look for the windows that are open for you after that tragedy.
That's such a poignant side note to your story, that your husbands are both gone now, that you're doing this and they aren't with you. And I think it's wonderful that you found each other and such an amazing friendship and built this travel life together. It's hard to find friends when you're this age. And not only did you do that, but you learned that you get along well and you are able to travel well and like some of the same things. I think that's just amazing. Good for you guys.
We both stay up late. We drink lots of coffee. We are workaholics. We both still work full time. And then we just kind of would talk about life. And Sandy hadn't traveled like I had. She was the first one to mention, she said, I've always wanted to do the Trans-Siberian Railway. We talked about how we both love trains and we love budget. You know, we're not poor, but we're not wealthy. We could spend more on a trip if we really wanted to, but we choose to do budget because it gives meaning to our travel, allows us to meet the local people more than if we're with tourists. We don't do tours. It's just Sandy and I. We've gone to Zambia together on the medical mission, but this was the first Sandy and Ellie trip.
What was the experience like?
Well, first thing, we had Israel. We both somehow knew this guy named Israel in Moscow because
Israel, the Nigerian.
He was a Nigerian doctor, but he wasn't practicing in Moscow. But he was kind of working as a travel agent or whatever. We knew we could do them cheaper if the local person bought the tickets for us. And so we said, we're wanting to take the Trans-Siberian second class. And he said, sure, I'll get your tickets. And he picked us up in his Lada. We had to break down on the way to the train station, but we made it to the second class train and it was great.
And you went from where to where on this trip?
We took the Trans-Siberian from Moscow through Siberia. We were in Lake Baikal, which was really, really a beautiful, phenomenal experience there. We spent 3 or 4 days there and then got back on the train and through Mongolia and then into China.
When we initially left Russia, the whole car that we were on was full of Russian families. And I had done mission work in Russia. So I had already on my computer some things in Russian and English. And there were lots of little children, and I love talking to and playing with children. So I had them to come look at my computer. And then their families started joining, and we just had a blast. The whole trip to Vladivostok from the time we
to Irkutsk, to Lake Baikal. Because it was packed. We get to Lake Baikal, we stay about 4 days. Then we get on the train to continue on the journey. And when we get on, our whole car is empty.
We're the only 2 people on our whole car.
And we're thinking, this is really strange. And we go 8 or 9 hours till we get to the Mongolian border. And they come on and ask passports. They ask us, and then pretty soon they say passports again. And
down the hall.
I said, Sandy, they just asked someone for passports. There's someone else on this train. So I'm being very inquisitive. And so I got out and I thought, I'm walking down who's on this train because this is just a total change from what we were doing at the beginning.
Right.
The first 4 or 5 days, I look in, the door's open, and there's this guy on the bed in pajamas. It was a European looking guy. Hair was disheveled. I called him Pajama Man. And I come back and I said, Sandy,
we're not the only person on this
and there's
car.
Pajama Man down there, and he's not friendly. Then pretty soon, we hear this commotion, and there's the KGB, and they're taking down the ceiling tiles by Pajama Man's room. And then they're in his room. You can see, going through everything. Then pretty soon, they've gotten Pajama Man. They're taking him. Pretty soon, here comes the KGB. Well, we need to search your compartment. So they did just like Pajama Man, took down all the ceiling tiles and was standing there thinking, oh my goodness, why had someone stowed away in our compartment? Because we knew we had nothing. Did somebody put something in our luggage? But fortunately, tearing up, throwing out all this stuff and going through everything, mattresses and all that, they found nothing. Then pretty soon, this big old burly KGB woman, and it's snowing outside. It's cold, and it's just the setting for, one of these Cold War situations. And this big burly female KGB woman comes up to the door, stands there with her feet apart, hands on her hips, says in very broken English, "You only witnesses to the crime." And Sandy and I are looking, what crime? Well, she can't quite tell us what it is.
This is what she said. We found, I don't remember the word, it goes in a gun.
Big, she
said, a bullet, a big bullet.
So anyway, she said, now, since you are only witnesses, we must have your information to testify. Well, let me tell you what, if the KGB standing there in your room and saying, please give us your email address, your phone number, everything about you, give it to us. Man, I think we sang like two birds. You want it? Okay, you got it. But that was in 2008, and they haven't called us back yet, so we're safe.
Funny part of the story.
So we had been about 8 hours. The train was way delayed because of this. Then we had time after she left. We still didn't have our passports. They took our passports. I sent an email because I have an internet connection there at the station. And I sent an email to my kids and Sandy's kids. And I said, well, we were, quote, witnesses to this crime on the Trans-Siberian. And if you don't hear from us in a few days, I guess you assume we're in a Siberian prison. Well, guess what? We had no internet after we left. And Sandy's son,
he was ready to call the State Department.
Yes, he was beside himself. It wasn't until about 3 days later that we were able to send an email that everybody got that we were fine.
He still doesn't think it's a funny story.
What that experience showed Sandy and I mean, we just pretty well roll with the punches. We have a very strong, positive feeling about life, and it's going to work out. It may not work out like we want, but it's going to work out, and just hang in there and smile.
And when we made that discovery that it's easy for us to travel together because neither one of us are wringing our hands or crying, or truthfully, our philosophy is our husbands are up in heaven waiting for us. It's all okay.
We've got a story to tell anyway.
You were traveling together in Syria in 2011 when the war broke out. Tell us about that. You'd been traveling with backpacks across Syria.
Yes. We had taken the train. We came from Romania. We'd met there together because we were both doing some Christian work with some women and teenagers in the church in Romania. And we took a train down to Istanbul. We took the train as far as we could in Turkey, and then we were going to have to get to Syria. We weren't sure how to get to Syria, but we figured we'd figure it out. We get to Adana, and we said, we want to go to Aleppo the next day. And they said, oh, you're going to have to take a public bus to Antakya, and then you spend the night, and the next day you go to Aleppo. So what do? We get on that bus the next morning, and what happens, Sandy?
The bus driver's phone rang, and he's talking, and he says, Sandy? And he hands me his telephone. And the person on the other end of the phone says, you want to go to Aleppo? And I turned to Ellie, and we said, yes. Today? Yes.
And he hung up.
Well, he said 12 noon.
12 noon.
And hung up. So this bus stopped at 12 noon, opened the doors. This man was wearing a badge. The only time we've ever had anyone official wearing a badge, helped us take our luggage off the bus. There was another bus waiting for us to get on it.
With 2 seats, only 2 empty seats. They were just waiting for our bus to come. To this day, we have no idea who did that. So the bus driver had been told these 2 ladies are coming by whoever that person was that calling us on the phone. We sort of suspect it was someone. We stayed in a small little quaint hotel there in Adana.
So we were the only females on this bus.
Headed to Syria.
Headed to Syria. And so I was trying to get my telephone. I had a little translator. I was trying to get my translator on Arabic language. So I just stood up and I said, does anyone speak English? And 2 people raised their hands and they helped me. And we started talking and just had more fun.
And one of them was from Iran. And he said, you're the first Americans I've ever talked to. His English was phenomenal. He was getting his PhD in some kind of community development in Turkey. And he's the one that got got us to the Syrian border. It took an hour and a half, but that guy was our hero. He was amazing. He said, you Americans, you view the world different than the rest of the world. He said, wow, we may not like your government, we like your people. But Americans, if you don't like the government, you don't like the people. But that's not the worldview for the rest of the world. It's just the worldview for Americans. We get to Syria and we go to Aleppo for a couple of days. We go to Damascus. Then we're headed to Palmyra, to the Syrian desert. And I had read somewhere where you want to spend a night in a Bedouin tent, non-touristy, and contact Muhammad. And there was an email from Muhammad. So I emailed Muhammad and said, hey, we're coming to the Palmyra. We'd like to go and spend the night in a Bedouin tent in the Syrian desert. No problem, he said. He had a little quaint Al-Khalil hotel there in Palmyra, and we stayed there as well as, first we went to the desert. And then coming back that morning, we rode camels 3 hours out to the Bedouin tent, and it was totally just Sandy and I and a Bedouin family that spoke no English. And then we coming in, we rode a car back in, and something bad was going on, and I go find an internet cafe, and there was a New York Times article that actually 2 hours after we had left Damascus, the war broke out. And we were in the square. I was taking photos 2 hours later in that exact spot was where people started being killed.
Oh my goodness.
Now we're in Palmyra.
Right. So staying at the little hotel after we'd stayed in the Bedouin tent. And interesting, when we did a tour of the ruins of Palmyra, we had a guide that gave us a tour, and we had just heard that there had been an outbreak of fighting in Damascus. So I asked our tour guide, I said, can I ask you a question in private? He said, sure. And I said, we just heard that war has started in Damascus. Is this true? He said, I'm afraid so. He said, that's what we've heard too. And he said, we do not want this war. Our livelihood depends upon tourists. And if we have a war, we will have no tourists. So it broke my heart for him.
Then what happened were we finally realized this is not a one and done, like they had that incident and then it's all cleaned up. We realize now that we're getting reports on the internet that this is the big deal and it's not safe to be in Syria. We were headed to Jordan. We were low on cash, and I said to Muhammad, well, you got to help us figure out to get to Jordan, but first, where's an ATM machine in Palmyra? Oh, no ATMs in my Palmyra. Okay, well, you take credit card. No credit cards in Palmyra. We said, well, Muhammad, we got a little problem. We owe you money. We got to pay for our hotel, and we're out of money, and we got to get to Jordan, and what are we going to do? And he said, well, there's an ATM machine in the old square in Damascus. Now that's where people are being killed. He said, I'll get my driver and you'll leave about 4 a.m, go to Damascus, go to the ATM, and then you can pay me. And this is what I figured out for you to go to Jordan. So that night, his mom fixes a wonderful meal because we didn't have any money to pay for anything. We have found Bedouins to be the most gracious of all. Hospitality is a trademark for Bedouins. And so we start off that morning to Damascus, 5-hour drive. The plan was you get there early enough before
the fighting
starts, okay? So we pull up in the car, and of course it's lined. The whole square, it's the old square in Damascus. There's police and military with their AK-47s. So we were with another Muhammad who was the driver, and he said, just stay here in the car. Let me go talk to him. So he goes up there, and Sandy and I are just in the car smiling. He talks about 10 minutes. Then you see the guard kind of smiles. He puts his gun down. 2 of them put their guns down, motion for us to come. And we hop out of that vehicle.
And we say, oh, I hope those ATMs work.
Yeah, if they don't work, we're sunk. Of course, the whole place, I don't know what stopped someone from not shooting us. But anyway, we run right there to the ATM. We put our cards in. So we got our money, and then we gave what we owed Muhammad back in Palmyra. And then Muhammad had told us, he said, I've arranged for a white unmarked car be on the side of the road. The door will be open, and a guy's going to be standing outside the door. You get in that car, and it will take you across the border into Jordan. And it did.
Wow, you two are amazing.
We're in a war-torn city, and they say your escape is this car with the door open. You get in it.
We gave this presentation several years ago to the Dyess Air Force Base Retired Officers Club. When they heard that part of the story, they said, "You ladies are crazy. There's no way we would do that."
But we found ourselves in a predicament, in a situation you had to get out of. And that's another thing. When you do independent travel, you've got to be prepared to solve your own problems or find someone who can. We have no tour leader that's going to say, "Oh, I can solve this. Let me take care of this," or whatever. Nobody would be in that situation we're in anyway.
It sounds like one of those lessons you learn when you travel, that sometimes you have to trust people, and people can really be very kind and helpful.
One of the things Sandy and I both a very strong feeling about is the goodness of humanity. We strongly believe in the goodness of humanity. It doesn't make any difference your race, your religion, your political views. We're all the same. We all have goodness in our heart. I mean, I know there are bad people out there, but you just need to open your heart and let it come in from other people.
Well, thanks so much, Ellie and Sandy. This has been so much fun hearing about your travel.
Thank
And
you.
thanks everyone for listening to Midlife Dialogues. Next week, part 2, where we talk about an amazing trip they took around the world in 80 days at age 80. Be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel if you want to make sure you don't miss it. See you next time.